You can go to the Rumble channel, and you can check out the new Rumble channel, the former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel. And you can see the second episode that's been released there, talking all about our Wordsmith Wednesday and Pierre Boulle's Planet of the Apes and Rod Serling's translation of that into a screenplay, and the big debate as to who came up with that ending. And my investigation just came across it, but I hit that eureka moment when I saw the Amazing Stories magazine cover from the February issue, which was on the stands in January of 1963. And you know what's on the cover of that if you saw the episode Wednesday. If you didn't, head to the Rumble channel, head to the YouTube channel, check it out. Please do so. Sign up, spread the word to as many people as possible, because I love to talk about fiction. So let's get right into it, everybody. You know what we're going to do? We're going to do some fun stuff. We are going to talk some fiction right now. And so we get to do the Outer Limits theme and hear the control voice as we go to Fiction Friday. Do not adjust your set.
There is nothing wrong with your television set. Do not attempt to adjust the picture. We are controlling transmission. If we wish to make it louder, we will bring up the volume. If we wish to make it softer, we will tune it to a whisper. We will control the horizontal. We will control the vertical. We can roll the image, make it flutter. We can change the focus to a soft blur, or sharpen it to crystal clarity. For the next hour, sit quietly and we will control all that you see and hear. We repeat, there is nothing wrong with your television set. You are about to participate in a great adventure. You are about to experience the awe and mystery which reaches from the inner mind to the outer limits.
All right. Thank you, Outer Limits. Thank you, Brad Wright, and the whole team from the Outer Limits. Tom Tanisco, miss you, man. And everybody, let's get into it. Let's chill and have a great time for Friday night. And thank you for being here. If you're watching on X, if you're watching after the fact, after we cut this, the team and I from Russia put this together for, of course, the former Star Trek Writing Fellow channel. And as I blow cat fur away from the co-pilot. Yeah, so in having been an aspiring television writer and then getting the opportunity to work on 2 television shows, one, The Outer Limits, redo for Showtime, and then Star Trek Voyager, I've always loved creative stories, creative storytelling, and there's so many different nuances to storytelling, whether it's prose fiction and the wonderful glories of colorful writing and stylish prose, dynamic plots, characterization, twists and turns. So many things come together, right? And one of the writers who did an amazing job with that was Robert E. Howard, and really the king of the pulps. And, of course, the creator of Conan and Cull and so many others. And a lot of people are not aware of his extremely wide range of writing. One of the things that really opened my eyes was when Tom Monteleone of Borderlands Press asked me to edit one of their little books, which is a series that they've put out. They've done multiple series of these. They're small hardcovers, and they're really neat. And they have things from M.R. James and things from W.W. Jacobs and a lot of different people. F. Paul Wilson, we mentioned F. Paul last week. And so I got to do this one, a little bronze book of weird tales from Robert E. Howard. I've got my intro in it, and I learned a lot about him. I already knew a lot, but I did some research, and I learned a lot. So tonight I want to talk to you about Robert E. Howard and give you a suggestion for a story. And it's not the story I'm going to read, but it's a great story, and it's a particular book. You can find it in a bunch of other books as well, and you can find an online version of it from Horror Babble if you want to listen to it. Great reading of it. Tell you about that in a minute. I want to give you a little information about Robert E. Howard, okay? This is from the introduction. If you're not familiar with Robert E. Howard, this is what I wrote. Robert E. Howard, Fantasy on the Fulcrum. Established, ensconced, enthroned, entombed. Take one's pick. As the father of sword and sorcery, Robert Irvin Howard, 1906 to 1936, stood at the nexus of two Western cultural and literary ages. As an American growing up in Texas in the final days of the frontier, he absorbed and enjoyed exercising the liberty of life in the wilds while receiving the wisdom, beauty, scholarship, and budding narrative power cultivated for decades by European and North American authors. Informed and, it seems, energized by the vanguard of fantasy he so greatly enjoyed in his youth, Mr. Howard grabbed the proverbial baton and ran hard and fast, becoming a creator in the vanguard of pulp. As such, he helped form the bridge between the dawn of fantasy and the golden age of pulp fantasy and science fiction, creating tales, poetry, worlds, and characters that, for nearly a century, have entertained and colored modern literature. But in addition to his stance at the nexus of an America passing out of the age of the frontier and into the settled, the urban, and the suburban, and just as he used the first stepping stones laid by fantasists of the late 19th century to march into the pulp era, Howard arguably could be cited as one of the first of another phenomenon. His unique position in history and culture, combined with his undeniable love for the entertainment he absorbed, hint that Howard and his work seem to have formed the building blocks of Inchoate fandom. Robert Howard was fueled by his love of Edgar Rice Burroughs, Poe, Lord Dunsany, and Lovecraft, even playing in Lovecraft's fictive Cthulhu realm, and thus was he both fan and creator. Howard was blessed with a keen alacrity for uniting his child's enthusiasm for action, adventure, and mystery with appropriately tailored and concise scholarship and real-world knowledge of land, legend, and life. From finely crafted descriptions of U.S. trails he undoubtedly trod, to European fantasies carved out of his own imagination, or realms created by his literary heroes. He was so greatly blessed and acquired so many various skills that even now, few authors can match his innate talents and practical expertise. Few writers of his age had acquired the training and expertise the real-world combat of boxing provided him. Few had hunted. Few had gutted or skinned the game. In fact, as time passes, decreasing numbers of contemporary authors and readers engage in those real-world activities. So in Howard's work, we see a synthesis and a battle. His iconic Conan the Barbarian, Solomon Kane, Cull of Atlantis, Bran MacMorn, Elborak, Cormac MacArt, and Steve Costigan stand with feet firmly planted in the realities of life. They know physical pain. They know how to fight. They know how to hunt and fish and hike and camp. They know the land and the shocking output of men who hatch and execute evil plans. They know sin, and they might know redemption. Yet, of course, they are unreal. They are characters in lands of make-believe. Thus, in a way, Howard was both a realist and a fantasist. He loved fantasy and worked within worlds of pretend, yet he infused these worlds with realistic characters, real sights, smells, natural threats, sensations, and survival skills. And he was both fan and creator. He play-acted thanks to others, but built his own literary realities, helping to usher in a slowly growing, now dominant, for better or for worse, cultural zeitgeist of fandom with all its social media buzz, conventioneering, cosplay, and even film and television servicing, all of which activity helps keep old favorites alive, and which might help foster new ideas, but which conversely might crowd out new ideas. 100 years after Howard both rode the early waves of fandom and helped create the tsunami that was to come, one can see that this form of cultural propulsion is a proverbial double-edged sword. The same goes for fiction. Despite us being drawn together to celebrate the work and legacy of Robert E. Howard, and despite the love of fiction that this writer-editor feels and tries to foster among others, I must acknowledge that, in addition to all its wonders, fiction always contains potentially stifling drawbacks. By definition, fiction is not real. It is departure, a flight of fancy, in their most rudimentary forms, carried out in the pantomime and oral history and storytelling of the Paleolithic, of written mythology or verbal and written folklore, and of modern storytelling. The acts of transmitting a tale and the act of receiving a tale facilitate the blessing of entertainment. But it's more than that. At their best, the mutually participatory act of storytelling and story receiving let people suspend disbelief, which is a delight and has incredible value. But in diving into the fantastic, into the unreal, the listener, reader, or viewer can, and ought to, remember that the fiction is unreal and that a real person is supplying it. We can both suspend disbelief and later remember the creator. Sensitive to this duality, the consumer of the fiction can derive a lesson, be it about life, love, principles, or even the art of storytelling, and respect reality as well. Yes, one can enjoy the entertainment of fiction, but it is important to remember that the tale comes from a person who has his or her own life, as you have yours. Respect for the real can accompany an appreciation for the unreal. The trouble with being a fan is that sometimes one forgets the multiple purposes for and the actual people behind the fantasy. And one can forget that the world of the fantastic is not a place in which we can live. Thus, in considering the work and life of Robert E. Howard, an early fan creator and a man who helped propel fantasy into the 20th and 21st centuries, it's possible to wonder if he felt more comfortable himself imagining rather than dealing with the necessities of the real world. It's possible that, in a sadly ironic way, for all his knowledge of fighting and hunting and hiking and the cut and dry real world, he was unable in the end to deal with a final reality. As many readers know, devastated by the coma and coming death of his mother, Mr. Howard took his own life at the age of 30, and some of his poetry might have expressed the troubles he eventually could not withstand. Is it possible that this brawler, this hiker, this hunter and skinner, so adept at handling important real-world tasks, found the fantastic and unreal to be so seductive he could not reconcile his fantasy-based ideals with the needs of life? That's possible. Who can tell? But Howard once wrote, "I have lived in the Southwest all my life, yet most of my dreams are laid in cold, giant lands of icy wastes and gloomy skies, and of wild, wind-swept fens and wilderness over which sweep great sea winds, and which are inhabited by shock-headed savages with light, fierce eyes. With the exception of one dream, I am never, in these dreams of ancient times, a civilized man. Always I am the barbarian, the skin-clad, tussle-haired, light-eyed wild man, armed with a rude axe or sword, fighting the elements and wild beasts, or grappling with armored hosts, marching with the tread of civilized discipline. From fallow, fruitful lands and walled cities. Oh, from fallow, fruitful lands and walled cities. This is reflected in my writings too. For when I begin a tale of old times, I always find myself instinctively arrayed on the side of the barbarian against the powers of organized civilization. End quote. So I wrote, Mr. Howard stood on historical and cultural fulcrums and left behind incredible entertainment and powerful lessons, beautiful landscapes, dark adversaries, and iconic heroes. His Hyborian age was brutal and stark and as vast and detailed as our very own Bronze Age. And from it, and from all his fiction and poetry, we can derive not just wonder and excitement, not just vivid images of places and people that didn't exist. We also can remember that which is most important. We can remember a life, a man named Robert E. Howard. So, before I read the story to you, and this has pigeons from hell in it and things like that. That's the Borderlands, a little bronze book that I got to edit. I want to recommend to you this one. This has a foreword by Paul DeFilippo in it, The Cthulhu Stories of Robert E. Howard. Okay, and in this is from Western Colorado University. In this is a story called The Skull Face. Let me just show you here. Skull Face. And it's a sort of a novella. This includes all sorts of great stories. There's so many great stories in this. So here's Skull Face. Starts with the Shadow Kingdom, and then Skull Face is the next one. That's a novella. That you can find almost all these in audio form. Somebody's read them around somewhere. But in particular, if you go to Horror Babble, those are great. Those are Ian Gordon does those, and his channel is phenomenal. And he has all of Skullface on there. And Skullface, it's a Cthulhu tied thing, but it's a wonderful adventure story. And if you get a chance, please, I highly recommend check out this book. Check out anytime you can find Skullface. And if you can get it in a book form, carry it around with you. You know, give the people who put it together some cash. You'll be happy. It's good stuff. And of course, the Cthulhu Lovecraft stuff. That Skullface story is great. But I also want to mention something else before we go any further into the reading. Is I want to tell you about the Robert E. Howard Foundation, because they are releasing incredible hardcovers of his stuff. And like I said, he wrote all sorts of things. And if you watch Michael Vaughn's channel, he'll introduce you to so much stuff. I mean, he's such a master of Robert E. Howard's history, his writings, the various forms of them. He and S.T. Joshi have done amazing work. And Michael's channel is great on BookTube. I love Michael's channel. It's so enjoyable to watch him. But this is the collection from the Robert E. Howard Foundation. It's a hardcover, limited edition of his Westerns. He wrote tons of Westerns. I mean, he was this was the time when you could make money off of your short stories. So those are his Westerns from the Foundation. This is just another example. This is the Robert E. Howard Science and Fantasy collection, right? So you have, sort of the interplanetary Edgar Rice Burroughs stuff. Then you've got even more. So here's his pirate adventures, okay? And these are all from the Robert E. Howard Foundation. Go to their website, and I've got even more. We've got the Elborak material. There's Elborak right there. Look at that. Beautiful artwork on these. Just amazing, amazing work. Amazing work. I mean, incredible. And the amazing thing, too, is that he was so well-read, and he was so young. I mean, he was steeped in the Greek classics, and Lovecraft was, too. They were amazing. They're just amazing guys. So wanted to give you all that information. And now I want to read you a little short story from the little book that I got to edit for Borderlands. And it is, let me just get this here for you. Yep. Okay. So we're going to go with this one. This is The Fearsome Touch of Death. First published in Weird Tales, February 1930. also published as The Touch of Death. As long as midnight cloaks the earth with shadows grim and stark, God save us from the Judas kiss of a dead man in the dark. Here's the story. Old Adam Farrell lay dead in the house wherein he had lived alone for the last 20 years. A silent, churlish recluse. In his life, he had known no friends, and only 2 men had watched his passing. Dr. Stein rose and glanced out the window into the gathering dusk. "You think you can spend the night here, then?" he asked his companion. This man, Falred by name, assented. "Yes, certainly. I guess it's up to me." "Rather a useless and primitive custom, sitting up with the dead," commented the doctor, preparing to depart. "But I suppose in common decency we will have to bow to precedents. Maybe I can find someone who'll come over here and help you with your vigil." Falred shrugged his shoulders. "I doubt it. Farrell wasn't liked, wasn't known by many people. I scarcely knew him myself, but I don't mind sitting up with the corpse." Dr. Stein was removing his rubber gloves, and Falred watched the process with an interest that almost amounted to fascination. A slight, involuntary shudder shook him at the memory of touching these gloves, slick, cold, clammy things, like the touch of death. "You may get lonely tonight if you don't find anyone," the doctor remarked as he opened the door. "Not superstitious, are you?" Falred laughed. "Scarcely. To tell the truth, from what I hear of Farrell's disposition, I'd rather be watching his corpse than have his guest in life." The door closed, and Falred took up his vigil. He seated himself in the only chair the room boasted, glancing casually at the formless, sheeted bulk on the bed opposite him, and began to read by the light of the dim lamp which stood on the rough table. Outside, the darkness gathered swiftly, and finally Falred laid down his magazine to rest his eyes. He looked again at the shape which had in life been the form of Adam Farrell, wondering what quirk in the human nature made the sight of a corpse not so unpleasant, but such an object of fear to man. Unthinking ignorance, seeing in dead things a reminder of death to come, perhaps. He decided that that could be it, and began idly contemplating as to what life had held for this grim and crabbed old man who had neither relatives nor friends, and who had seldom left the house wherein he had died. The usual tales of miser hoarded wealth had accumulated, but Falred felt so little interest in the whole matter that it was not even necessary for him to overcome any temptation to pry about the house for possible hidden treasure. He returned to his reading with a shrug. The task was more boresome than he had thought. After a while, he was aware that every time he looked up from his magazine and his eyes fell upon the bed with its grim occupant, he started involuntarily, as if he had for an instant forgotten the presence of the dead man, and was unpleasantly reminded of the fact. The start was slight and instinctive, but he felt almost angered at himself. He realized for the first time the utter and deadening silence which enwrapped the house, a silence apparently shared by the night, for no sound came through the window. Adam Farrell lived as far apart from his neighbors as possible, and there was no other house within hearing distance. Falred shook himself as if to rid his mind of unsavory speculations and went back to his reading. A sudden vagrant gust of wind whipped through the windows, in which the light of the lamp flickered and went out suddenly. Falred, cursing softly, groped in the darkness for matches, burning his fingers on the lamp chimney. He struck a match, relighted the lamp, and glanced over at the bed. Glancing over at the bed, got a horrible mental jolt. Adam Farrell's face stared blindly at him, the dead eyes wide and blank, framed in the gnarled gray features. Even as Falred instinctively shuddered, his reason explained the apparent phenomenon. The sheet that covered the corpse had been carelessly thrown across the face, and the sudden puff of wind had disarranged and flung it aside. Yet there was something grisly about the timing, something fearsomely suggestive, as if in the cloaking dark, a dead hand had flung aside the sheet, just as if the corpse were about to rise. Falred, an imaginative man, shrugged his shoulders at these ghastly thoughts and crossed the room to replace the sheet. The dead eyes seemed to stare malevolently, with an evilness that transcended the man's churlishness in life. The workings of a vivid imagination, Falred knew, and he recovered the gray face, shrinking as his hand chanced to touch the cold flesh, slick and clammy, the touch of death. He shuddered with the natural revulsion of the living for the dead and went back to his chair and magazine. At last, growing sleepy, he lay down upon a couch, which, by some strange whim of the original owner, formed part of the room's scant furnishings, and he composed himself for slumber. He decided to leave the light burning, telling himself that it was in accordance with the usual custom of leaving lights burning for the dead, for he was not willing to admit to himself that already he was conscious of a dislike for lying in the darkness with the corpse. He dozed, awoke with a start, and looked at the sheeted form on the bed. Silence reigned over the house, and outside it was very dark. The hour was approaching midnight, with its accompanying eerie domination over the human mind. Falred glanced again at the bed where the body lay, and found the sight of the sheeted object now most repellent. A fantastic idea had birth in his mind and grew, that beneath the sheet, the mere lifeless body had become a strange, monstrous thing, a hideous, conscious thing that watched him with eyes which burned through the fabric of the cloth. This thought, a mere fantasy, of course, he explained to himself by the legends of vampires, undead ghosts, and such like, all the fearsome attributes with which the living have cloaked the dead for countless ages, since primitive man first recognized in death something hard and apart from life. This thought was explained. Man feared death, thought Falred, and some of this fear of death took hold on the dead so that they too were feared. And the sight of the dead engendered grisly thoughts, gave rise to dim fears of hereditary memory lurking back in the dark corners of the brain. At any rate, that silent, hidden thing was getting on his nerves. He thought of uncovering the face, on the principle that familiarity breeds contempt. The sight of the features, calm and still in death, would banish, he thought, all such wild conjectures as were haunting him in spite of himself. But the thought of those dead eyes staring in the lamplight was intolerable, so at last he blew out the light and lay down. This fear had been stealing upon him so insidiously and gradually that he had not been aware of its growth. With the extinguishing of the light, however, and the blotting out of the sight of the corpse, things assumed their true character and proportions, and Falred fell asleep almost instantly, on his lips a faint smile for his previous folly. He awakened suddenly. How long he had been asleep he did not know. He sat up, his pulse pounding frantically, the cold sweat beading his forehead. He knew instantly where he was, remembered the other occupant of the room. But what had awakened him? A dream, yes. Now he remembered a hideous dream in which the dead man had risen from the bed and stalked stiffly across the room with eyes of fire and a horrid leer frozen on his gray lips. Falred had seemed to lie motionless, helpless. Then, as the corpse reached a gnarled and horrible hand, he had awakened. He strove to pierce the gloom, but the room was all blackness, and all without was so dark that no gleam of light came through the window. He reached a shaking hand toward the lamp, then recoiled as if from a hidden serpent. Sitting here in the dark with a fiendish corpse was bad enough, but he dared not light the lamp, for fear that his reason would be snuffed out like a candle at what he might see. Horror, stark and unreasoning, had full possession of his soul, for he no longer questioned the instinctive fears that rose in him. All those legends he had heard came back to him and brought a belief in them. Death was a hideous thing, a brain-shattering horror, imbuing lifeless men with a horrid malevolence. Adam Farrell, in his life, had been simply a churlish but harmless man. Now he was a terror, a monster, a fiend lurking in the shadows of fear, ready to leap on mankind with talons dipped deep in death and insanity. Falred sat there, his blood freezing, and fought out his silent battle. Faint glimmerings of reason had begun to touch his fright when a soft, stealthy sound again froze him. He did not recognize it as the whisper of the night wind across the windowsill. His frenzied fancy knew it only as the tread of death and horror. He sprang from the couch, then stood, undecided. Escape was in his mind, but he was too dazed to even try to formulate a plan of escape. Even his sense of direction was gone. Fear had so stultified his mind that he was not able to think consciously. The blackness spread in long waves about him, and its darkness and void entered into his brain. His motions, such as they were instinctive. He seemed shackled by mighty chains, and his limbs responded sluggishly, like an imbecile's. A terrible horror grew up in him and reared its grisly shape, and that dead man was behind him, was stealing upon him from the rear. He no longer thought of lighting the lamp. He no longer thought of anything. Fear filled his whole being. There was room for nothing else. He backed slowly away in the darkness, hands behind him, instinctively feeling the way. With a terrific effort, he partly shook the clinging mists of horror from him, and the cold sweat clammy upon his body. He strove to orient himself. He could see nothing, but the bed was across the room in front of him. He was backing away from it. There was where the dead man was lying, according to all rules of nature. If the thing were, as he felt, behind him, then the old tales were true. Death did implant in lifeless bodies an unearthly animation, and dead men did roam the shadows to work their ghastly and evil will upon the sons of man. Then, great God! What was man but a wailing infant, lost in the night and beset by frightful things from the black abysses and terrible unknown voids of space and time? If this were true, these conclusions he did not reach by any reasoning process. They leaped full grown into his terror-dazed brain. He worked his way slowly backward, groping, clinging to the thought that the dead man must be in front of him. Then his back-flung hands encountered something slick, cold, and clammy, like the touch of death. A scream shook the echoes, followed by the crash of a falling body. The next morning, they who came to the house of death found 2 corpses in the room. Adam Farrell's sheeted body lay motionless on the bed, and across the room lay the body of Falred beneath the shelf where Dr. Stein had absent-mindedly left his gloves. Rubber gloves, slick and clammy to the touch of a hand groping in the dark, a hand of one fleeing his own fear. Rubber gloves, slick and clammy and cold, like the touch of death. Robert E. Howard. Great little stories from Robert E. Howard in this book from Borderlands Press. You can check that out. And there are poems in this book. We did a lot to try to do honor to Robert E. Howard. This is The Fearsome Touch of Death from 1930, Robert E. Howard. And that's the book, little bronze book. It might be sold out. I think it's already sold out, but you can get it. If you get them used, they're like super expensive. So I hope you liked that. And I hope that was enjoyable. I might start to put these stories out themselves if they're in, out of their copyright. I might put them out on the YouTube and Rumble channels for former Star Trek writing fellow. Put those out as separate things, with blemishes and everything combined. They'll be out there. Maybe once in a while I'll edit something if there's something really bad or whatever. Now, let's turn to where we stand on Tower. I've been working on the story Tower. And if you're new to the program, this is what's turning into a novelette, may become a novella, about 2 people who work in 1960 in Vermont for the Forestry Service of the state. And they go to a place that is called Frenton. And Frenton is a town that had very few people in it decades before. The government took it over through eminent domain, and they dammed up a river and they flooded out the town. And what used to stand on a hill and was used as a fire tower is now in the middle of this lake, this reservoir, and it's got the tower on it still. It's on an island. So every season they have to go. They have a big fence way out at the start of the forest, which itself is very far from the last habitation. And they check the fence, they go through the gate, and then they take a canoe across to the island to check the fire tower, make sure it's all secured and that no kids have tried to break in or anything like that. And so what we've discovered is that when they went inside to check on things, it looks like somebody actually did get in there. Whoever was there didn't leave a lot of trash and stuff like that, but wrapped little black ribbons around the barbed wire that goes around this very sparse, mostly just rocks and scrubby bushes island in the middle of the lake, and wrote a weird pair of poems on either side of the south-facing window. Very strange stuff, which actually, if you're familiar with the work of Clark Ashton Smith, who was a contemporary of Robert E. Howard, they're actually Clark Ashton Smith poems that are up on the wall there. So anyway, so they go back out to leave after locking it all up, and there's a big snow squall that comes. Big wind. It's snowing. It's just crazy. It's mid-November, and it's just a freak thing. They find that the canoe was not pulled far enough up on the shore, and it has blown over 100 yards offshore, like really far. So the guy, Paul, goes out to try to get it. He can't pull it up. He's getting hypothermia. Then the woman, Caroline, goes out and she rescues him and pulls him in. They spend the night up inside this place. There's a little broken piece of glass in the north-facing window, which allows some of the Canadian air to come in. And they wake up in the morning and they're thinking it's the weekend. And, well, somebody will know that they're there because they had to get the Jeep. And then she says, "Oh, I was in such a hurry, I didn't sign the Jeep out." And then they see on the schedule that this check was actually not on the schedule. It was taken off the schedule. So nobody knows they're there. And they have a little bit of food in the guy's backpack, right? They have a Hershey bar together. And they spend the night together sort of wrapped up in each other's arms, wet, damp, trying to get warm, and she's been able to start a little bit of a fire, and he awakens, and he's passed through the hypothermia stage. He's okay, but still, they got to do something. So they start to talk about what their plan is going to be, and they're like, well, we're going to probably have to spend the weekend here, so let's see what we can do. We can't, and he wonders, should we start a fire with this stuff and try to get somebody to notice the smoke? She's like, yeah, but it would be so far, it would be dissipated because the woods are so big here, and he's like, yeah. She goes, I think, we ought to keep it because it could get pretty cold tonight. And there's not much fuel for the fire. So this is sort of where we stand. He decides that he's going to go out, and he thinks, oh, you know what? I can do an SOS, and he's been in Korea. So he starts thinking about the people in Korea. So by mid-morning, the snowfall had stopped, leaving a blanket of 2 or more inches and a large number of footprints and tracks crossing the island like brands on the hide of a bull. They had a pile of twigs and old wind-blown leaves that reached Paul's shoulders, and they took a longer break to sit and rest. They have the steps that are at the bottom of this tower thing. Paul wiped his wet brow and removed his wool cap, scratching the thin remnants of a hairline that lingered around his crown. So they've been going back and forth across the island, collecting as much as they can. It's kind of damp. He says, Caroline, he thumbed at the pile, I kept thinking as we got all this stuff. She leaned her weary shoulders against the steps, rested her head as well, nodding as he glanced at her. Yeah, I kept thinking about those folks in Korea, because he spent time in Korea, around some of the big rice paddies we'd encounter. And by the way, we lost almost as many GIs who drank the damn paddy water as we did in combat. We'd see the ladies mostly, floating their collected sacks on these kind of wicker rafts, kind of like the thung boats in Vietnam. He glanced down, plucking a twig from his sleeve and staring at it, continuing to speak as if he didn't know he was doing something else. Or like those coracle things they made in ancient Ireland. He tilted the twig towards the pile of fuel that they had collected. It's damp, don't forget. I don't know what you think, but I think we might have enough collected here to try something like that. Maybe wrap it up in our belts or some of that barbed wire around the exterior here and make a big bundle. And then one of us could try to lie on it and then paddle across. Without saying a word, she sat up and tried to consider that pile out there on the lake. And when Paul spoke again, his tone was almost apologetic. Nah, it'd be too dangerous to risk losing all that wood. She nodded, and he almost seemed to complete her thoughts. If it broke apart or simply couldn't carry one of us, we'd either be out of that wood or it'd be even more waterlogged and tough to burn than it already is. Absolutely. We have to conserve the fuel, she said. No bonfire to attract eyes that won't see us out here, and no big risks like that. All right, let's get this treehouse stocked, he said, getting up. But first, she raised a brow, and he raised an index finger. In addition to some of my old basic training that came back to me as we zigzagged around here, I realized there's one thing we can do while we have this snow on the ground. She says, what's that? He says, we can write SOS with stones or moss on the snow. It's a slim possibility, but if we make the letters large enough, a plane might see them. She liked that idea. Okay, she said, your choice. I'll work on that, he offered. That lets you stay in under some shelter, and there'll likely be a bit left that I can help you with when I've finished off. They smiled at each other, smiles of agreement and perhaps relief that they were getting something done. But Caroline suspected they were missing a great deal. She watched him head out from under the tower, and she turned to the pile of twigs, determined to itemize what they ought to do. And to be sure, Paul drew on his military experience to fill in the gaps. This wasn't exactly homesteading, but it required that kind of thinking, because they both knew there was no getting off this rock on their own, and their enemies and vulnerabilities likely were too numerous to count. So there's a little like chapter breaky thing there, achy breaky heart. They completed their tasks in about an hour. Paul I'll do that again. Apologize. They completed their tasks in about an hour. Paul finished his stonework to help Caroline carry the final bundles to their penthouse loft, and the two set about turning one of the work tables to protect against heat loss through the south window. So they turned it. I didn't say turning correctly. Set about turning one of the work tables to protect against heat loss through the south window, then working together to create a kind of flume or chimney to release smoke through the small window pane breach on the other side. By sliding close together two filing cabinets, then opening the top and second layers of the drawers, they were able to create a kind of metal-sided fireplace. And by opening some of the files and wedging them at an angle over the little space for the fire, they hoped to block smoke sufficiently that if they could make a decent draft, most of the fumes that they might create would say a fond farewell by leaving through the broken glass. Caroline set to starting the fire while Paul opened his magic backpack and took out some canned nuts. "Welcome to the island kingdom of Frenton, Mr. Peanut," he offered, holding aloft the tin as if it were a torch, and he were the Statue of Liberty. Then, still holding the pose, he offered a sly grin. "It's almost a full can, by the way." Then he knelt beside her as she used one more of her precious matches from her own backpack to light the driest of the tinder they had collected and had mixed with papers from the cabinet into a kind of bird's nest spiderweb cluster on the floor. "Thanks." Sinfully dirty but dreadfully hungry, she devoted barely an eye blink of time to wiping her fingers on her jeans before grabbing a handful. And as the tinder sparked and the smaller twigs steamed, then caught in quick flashes of gold and yellow, she threw half into her mouth and savored the explosion of salt and oils. Thank God. He seemed to relax as well, settling down to remove his shoes and tug at his socks. "Now these are wet. I took them off before my little swim in Loch Ness here, but damn, I feel like I'm going to be wet all the goddamn time." He yanked off one, then the other, and turned to study the small fireplace arrangement that they had constructed. The smoke rose, some rolling upwards into the room as it got past their little hood arrangement, but much of it was being drawn out through the breach in the glass. Not bad. He got on his knees and shifted the files, focusing on pulling them further towards him. Then he tried to reach for his socks, as if he were going to hang them over the fire to dry. "Are there any paper clips around?" Caroline nodded, got up, and plodded to the central table. "I wonder what the town was like," she mused, smelling the smoke and thinking about all the old chimneys sticking up down below. All the families around the hearth, and the cooking and kitchens. And that's where I leave it. Now, I want to tell you something very interesting. This is going to be maybe kind of uncanny to you. The name Frenton is, as I mentioned, in my novella Fishing, which has already been published. It's the same place, same reservoir, except Fishing happens later, happens in the 70s. And I wrote that first, obviously. Frenton, the name Frenton, the only reason I have the name Frenton is it's an in-joke to my old producer from radio when I was at a station in New London, New Hampshire, near Dartmouth. Because I used to do a skit where, actually it started in Manchester, where John Kerry would call and get people's names wrong. Because he was asked who his favorite Red Sox player was, and he said Manny Ortiz or something like that, which is a combination of two Red Sox players. So there's Manny Ramirez and David Ortiz, and he combined them both because he didn't know anything about what was going on. So we would have him on my radio show. John Kerry would call in and give sports updates, and he would always get something wrong. Right? "I really love that hat trick they got in that basketball game, guard. G-man, I'm really sporty." Because he was running for president, trying to look like he was a man of the people. as he took his private jet around the Flying Squirrel. I mean, his wife's jet. So, because he's so green. I am not very green, are you? But anyway, so we had him call in one time from France, and he was reporting on the election results on election night. And he said that he came in with 110% of the vote. And at that time, there wasn't all that manipulation stuff about, the 2016 and 2020. But we were just joking around because we figured, well, why not, So it's like, yes, here in France, John Kerry has come in with 110% of the vote. Of course. And I was like, where are you in France? Oh, he says, I'm in Marsalis. I was like, what? Yeah, Marsalis, like the Marsalis brothers, Wenton, Benton, Frenton. Okay, so he says Frenton. I'm like, you mean Marseille? What are you talking? So anyway, so he gets it right and he mentions Frenton. Then when I went up to New London, I wanted to do preparatory to Halloween. I wanted to do a series of stories about kind of weird cryptoarchaeology and conspiracy theories, and have fake interviews with somebody. My friend Malcolm, I was going to have him do a guy who was doing research about a secret facility that was run by the federal government. It was like a prison facility years ago in the White Mountains that had been closed off, where they were doing experiments on federal prisoners and the three strikes law and stuff like that. That's why they had this. That's what I said, that's why Al Gore wrote the three strikes law, to get more people to experiment on, right? So then we were going to do a series of stories about how it turns out that the place still existed and was underground. And then on Halloween, we were going to have it that we were going to have a caller call in and say that he was investigating it, and he actually found the place out in the woods. So we're going to do this over the course of weeks and just keep doing it, like a long-term War of the Worlds thing, to say, like, there's this place and people are finding it, and have multiple people like, yeah, I found it too, that sort of thing. I'm calling in, right? So on Halloween, we were going to have it that there was a guy there reporting on it, and then he gets attacked by something that's escaped. And then I was going to say, yeah, we could approach advertisers to do a War of the Worlds, where at Halloween, the monsters are arriving at each one of their places. And they're like, rah! But it's all actually pre-recorded with these advertiser people that we bring on, and so on and so forth. Then it's finally us holed up in the studio, me and my producer and I, and we're the last man running. That's it. All the rest are these monsters that have come out of this facility through genetic engineering from the federal government in the White Mountains in New Hampshire. So akin to, yes, the manipulation of the money supply, which started anew, a pace with the destruction of the already destroyed gold standard at the Bretton Woods conference in 1970. What was that, 72, 71, whatever. So when they broke in on the Bonanza thing with Nixon. So, and again, that's the hotel where my brother got married. So there you go. So we never got to do the Frenton thing, but I always remembered the Frenton name. Now, let me tell you something. You know that Robert E. Howard story I told you about, Skullface? The only reason I said Frenton was it was actually a slip. I was just riffing, and I just came up with Frenton. I just said the word. It just came out. Frenton. I have never heard that ever anywhere else. Never heard it before, never heard it since. Well, guess what? If you read Skullface by Robert E. Howard, inside the story Skullface, and you can listen to this if you go to Horror Babble and you listen to Ian Gordon's version of it, there is a place called Frenton House. I don't know if I can find it here for you. I should have marked it before. I'll try to do it next time we come on. Frenton House. And at times they just say, going to Frenton. I'm working on a story based in Frenton, and I pick up at random something that now mentions, and I edited a book by Robert E. Howard, which I would not have edited if I hadn't been sick and here and become friends with Tom Monteleone, a fellow libertarian. All these different circumstances bring together the final moment where I'm listening and just happen to listen to Ian Gordon as I'm reading and going audio back and forth. I hear Frenton. It's right in here. Skull face. Now, if that isn't uncanny, I don't know what is. Because Frenton isn't a word. I didn't know it was a name. I just said it 15, 20 years ago for a skit. Because I thought John Kerry was so obnoxious and he wasn't getting names right. So I was joking around about the Marsalis brothers, the musicians. Now, if that isn't weird, I don't know what is weird, but that is weird. As my friend Steve Pizzello, the editor of American Cinematographer, would say, that's weird. It's really weird. Strange, preternatural, bizarre. Yes, weird. Let me know your thoughts as we say goodnight. And I appreciate you all being here. All of you folks watching on X, check out the channel. Please subscribe to the new channel on YouTube, former Star Trek writing fellow. You can see the first and second episodes. And by the way, it's a little fuzzy on the focus on the second episode at the very start, like the first minute. And of course, you can go to the Rumble channel where we're not censored. Liberty Conspiracy is there, as well as the new former Star Trek writing fellow. I'll give you lots of inside takes on what it was like working with Brandon Braga, talking about the Borg, working at Outer Limits, some of the really nice people working up there, really cool folks. And we will read more great stories. We'll talk about great classic writers in fantasy and horror fiction. We'll read more of Tower, and we'll start up very soon on the releases of some of the writing that I've been working on. It's going to be awesome.